Live with local comforts. Love community over commuting. Live in a home built by Glenveagh. Love where you live. Glenveagh, home of the new.
Welcome to Through the Front Door, brought to you by Glenveagh Homes. On this podcast, we'll be consulting a wide range of experts, from mortgage brokers and architects to interior designers and sustainability experts, who will be addressing those burning questions you've always wanted to know the answer to. This week, I'm joined by Ray Palmer-Smith, who is the Director of New Homes for Ireland at Knight Frank.
Particularly with a developer like Glenveagh. They have a great reputation. People have a lot of confidence in buying off plan, so they're comfortable enough to make that decision without necessarily walking the unit. That becomes very interesting, obviously, because people do have the confidence to be able to buy. But from our perspective, obviously, we're trying to make the process as fair as possible. Generally, with something like that, it'll operate on a first come, first served basis.
From their experience to mine, we'll be sure to cover all the bases to put you, the listener, on your way to finding your perfect home. Ray, how are you?
I'm good, Liz. How are you this morning? Thank you for having me on.
Oh God, my pleasure, my absolute pleasure. The last time we met, and actually one of the last times we spoke, we were standing at the collection on Shrewsbury Road, which is a pretty extraordinary bunch of new homes.
It is.
Not
It's an
the type of
incredible
new
development.
home that people get the opportunity to view, no mind see, no mind purchase.
Agreed. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that's a phenomenal development, which actually, interestingly, its construction on that finishes later on this month. So that development will be completely finished and launching to the market in May. It's interesting because also I think that has come along at a time where there's a lot more of housing, particularly in Dublin City, where it's catering towards a downsizing or right-sizing market, where a lot of people who maybe have been in an older red brick for a number of years are looking to kind of make that move into an A-rated home. So we've seen a big increase, both in terms of demand, but also the number of different developments that are coming to the market to meet that need.
Yeah, and listen, I have to say, it's A-rated all the way for me. I do not own nor live in an A-rated home, and I suppose that's another thing actually that's really important in people's lives right now, is actually writing their home. I know you mentioned right sizing there, but actually starting to write their home for, to airtight and proof it for the future, and to become as warm and cozy as we possibly can, particularly with the noises that have been made about electricity and gas. I mean, do you find, and also, by the way, sorry, I'm just thinking on my feet here, the fact that stock is currently so low, secondhand stock primarily, and still the demand is shooting on. Are you finding now that new homes are becoming more and more needed and wanted by those who are right sizing or downsizing?
We're definitely seeing a bit of a shift in terms of the varying demographic now that are looking at new homes, where previously it would obviously have been primarily first-time buyers, and obviously there were quite a lot of say international clients who were maybe moving in. You'd have a lot of experience, obviously, in that regard, Liz, with international clients who are maybe being relocated by their company, particularly within tech, who were always very keen in terms of new builds. There's a whole new cohort of buyers who now look at new builds. So whether that's families looking to try and find a home that's more appropriate for their needs, or new retirees, or people forward thinking and planning for retirement, who are thinking, well, actually, I've got a future proof in a way that maybe I didn't on a previous purchase. And so people thinking a lot more about how does my space work for me, but also really thinking very carefully. I mean, even before we had the increased energy prices that we're seeing, obviously, right now, for a number of different reasons, even before that, I think people were definitely becoming a lot more eco-conscious anyway. So not necessarily just about how much does that cost me financially, but how much is it costing the planet for me to live in an older house that that maybe isn't as energy efficient. And I think there's a lot of people who have been thinking about that for a number of years, but there's definitely a bigger concentration of that now. And it's interesting for us because obviously it does mean that there's a huge variety now of different types of buyers for new build property.
Yeah, I mean, there certainly is, and you mentioned the cohort of international, I suppose, new Irish, for want of a better way of putting them, or new international corporates who are coming into the country, and they're not used to freezing cold houses. That I think very much the difference between us and our European cousins is that they already live in, generally speaking, and in the cities primarily, well-built apartment blocks, raising families. They have absolutely no issue with it whatsoever, with lots of good green space, etc. And they use that green space to go to the park and take their kids. Whereas we've a funny phenomenon in Ireland now. It's a bit like the field. We want our patch of grass out the back. We don't want anybody looking at us. We don't want to be overlooked. But it's very slowly starting to change. And maybe the planners are coming around a little bit that we actually need a bit more high density. We need to go a little bit higher, and we need to design apartments for life, as opposed to the first step on the rung of the ladder. And then we're all off moving again. That
Absolutely.
maybe apartments, and I know we're talking about new homes, but apartments falling under that umbrella, and new homes is maybe somewhere that will stay for significantly longer if they're designed and built correctly, that allows us to do that.
I think you're absolutely right. I think quite understandably, there maybe is a bit of a preconception in Ireland of what an apartment is like to live in because of maybe apartments that people saw built 20 or 30 years ago. They're very, very different from what's being constructed today. And apartments feel very much, they do fulfill a requirement within the market. And the problem is that if you aren't building them, then those people have no option but to then compete with the first-time buyers and the families who are buying houses because there isn't anything else to buy. So what it ends up actually doing is compounding the problem for an already very, very busy and densely populated part of the market. And I think you're right. There are a lot of particularly buyers who come to us from, say, mainland Europe or from Asia, who are used to living in very high quality apartment blocks, and it's part of the way of living. And I mean, myself, I lived for about 15 years in London, and then lived between London and New York, and so my experience of living, and even the way families live, is definitely a mixture between houses and apartments. And there are a lot of people who live in apartments and prefer to live in apartments because of the flexibility and security that enables them, and also that they make the decision to be living in an area that allows them to perhaps walk to work, walk the kids to school in the morning. And
I think
all of those things
that
we don't necessarily think as being an option here.
Yeah, walking anywhere, I have to say, within any city, with any European city that's a business hub, is an absolute luxury. It's
Absolutely.
a luxury to be able to walk to work or walk your kids to school. It really is. And that's something that, we're drivers here.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things that we noticed as well, and this is something that Knight Frank tracked globally over the pandemic. We do a lot of research, and our global research teams work with our local research teams to compile a lot of data. And one of the things that we saw that happened a lot over the last 2 years and throughout the COVID pandemic has been a change in what people's requirements are and what people's needs are and what people's expectations are for their next purchase as a result of what they went through. So, for example, we all now know, living here, what's within 2 kilometers of our house, what's within 3 kilometers of our house, and what's within 5 kilometers of our house, because we were forced to then realize, actually, I either have everything I need on my doorstep or I have nothing I need on my doorstep.
And it was only where we could walk to as well.
Absolutely.
With our 5 kilometer radius, it was actually a very good exercise.
And I think that's it's interesting, because if you look at a lot of the stats and kind of some of the counties and some of the specific towns and cities that have performed well in terms of price increases, particularly for second-hand homes over the last 12 to 24 months, there was a bit of a trend that was emerging fairly quickly for people looking to buy or rent outside of major city hubs. However, that then also started being twinned with people who were living quite remotely, now looking to live more centrally. And we're seeing quite a big shift back now, where people are looking now, who maybe had been waiting for things to start dying down, and particularly a lot of the older generation of buyers now looking for things that are either in the middle of a town, in the middle of a village, or in the middle of a city, because we then become, I guess, situations like this make us in some ways can make us feel a little vulnerable. If maybe we feel like we're quite isolated, or in some ways financially vulnerable, if we feel like perhaps all of our assets are tied up in a larger family home that we no longer necessarily need, but actually we've realized that we want to kind of make the money that we have tied up in that work for us in other ways. So we've seen a really big increase now in the number of particularly older generation who are coming forward to us, who maybe had an original plan of retirement that has now changed as a result of the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's fascinating. That I find that really, really fascinating. But equally, the numerous older homes that, as you just said, are the major asset within a family unit, or particularly an older couple who may be thinking about retirement, etc. And that's their greatest asset, and who potentially maybe don't have private pensions either, and want to utilize those funds to stay within a community and have everything around them.
Absolutely.
And yet bank a few bob, or use that money to now fund a pension.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing as well is we're all thinking, I think, a lot more about the people that we're closest to over the last couple of years. So we're also seeing a number of people coming forward and maybe saying, well, our original plan was that we wanted to keep a 4-bedroom house. Actually, now what we'd really like is a 2-bedroom apartment, because we've now decided that we want to spend more time with our kids who live in Australia. And so I think we're seeing quite a lot now of people just kind of completely revising what their plans are for what they do over the next few years. And as you say, releasing some money, and sometimes that is to do something exciting. Sometimes it really is for practical reasons, as you say. Maybe you don't have the private pension that you need to be able to maintain your lifestyle. So yeah, I think a lot of people are thinking more sensibly about it, and that will be further compounded now by energy prices and what we're seeing. And look, obviously we have a short-term situation at the moment, which is particularly compounding that problem. However, this is a problem that is going to kind of continue over the next few decades. So future-proofing and making a decision now that gets you into an A-rated home is obviously a sensible choice to make.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with you. And what actually I find fascinating about, for both of us, and you've really you've used great rhetoric there to describe working in the property industry, is that I find, when you're actually managing people's expectations and emotions, when you're guiding them through the process of what you feel they should be doing in terms of purchasing a new home primarily. And everybody is in their box, Ray, at varying phases of life. Whether they're first-time buyers, whether they're now, they're upgrading their home because they have a growing family, and then you get to the point of, okay, now what are we going to do? Are we buying a new apartment for ourselves? Are we going to become more remote and live in a more rural area, quieter? But it is fascinating to watch people go through those phases, and we're very much a part of it.
We are. I think of ourselves as being in the same category as therapists and hairdressers.
Oh, listen, stop it.
We get an amazing insight into people's lives.
Expectations and emotions. It's absolutely crazy, isn't it?
And it's funny, actually, because we were having a discussion internally with our team about kind of the parts of the job that we enjoy the most of what we do. And of my team of 12 here in our Dublin office, they almost everybody said that the part they like most about this job is that they get to participate in some of the most significant points of people's lives. And it's interesting how different, what is important to different people, but that's one of the most enjoyable elements of this, is you get to see people buy their first home, or you get to see people move into the home of their dreams, or whatever that moment is in their life. We get
you
to
see
kind
their
of be a small
stress
part of
and
it.
anxiety just
Absolutely,
fade
yeah.
away when you hand them the keys.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
nice to be able to get to participate in that.
Yeah, it is. It's extraordinary. It gets you hooked, actually.
Absolutely.
When you're in, you're in. Anyway, but look, the new homes market right now, I predominantly purchase secondhand homes. I also purchase new homes on behalf of varying clients, as you know.
Yes.
How are you finding the market right now? Is it on the flip side in the new homes market that there's always demand, and because of COVID, construction has been held up, and hopefully you're back at the races now with all your new home developments and sites? How are you finding it out there?
So it's interesting. So the new homes market in Ireland, obviously, and we've been reading about it or experiencing it personally for a number of years, where it's constantly busy. There's constant demand, and there's been a continued undersupply to the market. Now, you're right in saying that obviously things are starting to get back in terms of the volume of what's being delivered to the market. However, it will be a number of years before it comes anywhere near to meeting what the actual demand is. So if you take, I guess, last year as an example, so there were just over 20,000 new homes delivered into the market in Ireland.
Doesn't sound like a lot, really. Is that nationwide?
That's nationwide. And of that, obviously, there were quite a lot of those that were social housing. There was a lot of those that were rental product. That's across the entire country. And then if you break that down into Dublin,
yeah,
in the greater Dublin area, it's somewhere in the region of about just over 4,000 houses, new houses that would have been delivered into the market. Now, around half of those were bought by the state, because obviously we have a dual housing crisis happening at the moment in terms of shortage of supply for individuals who want to buy, but also shortage of supply for the state to be able to provide social housing. So there was a huge volume of what was originally intended for individuals to buy that was purchased by the state, obviously for the same reasons as individuals want to buy. There's a really, really massive undersupply of available housing for the state as well. So when you actually think about that as being sort of 2,000 homes in Dublin that were supplied to the market, you then maybe have a greater understanding of exactly where we are in that cycle. Because if you assume that how the government are saying that the requirement annually for housing at the moment nationally is about 35,000 homes a year.
Yeah,
we are very, very far behind that, and it will take a while for that to gain momentum. So and there's a whole host of other reasons that we won't go into today. There are plannings taking a very, very long time across lots of different developments. So I think it'll take a number of years for that to catch up. The knock-on effect to the individual is that for every single development that comes onto the market, there's a lot of competition for everything that you're trying to buy. That is obviously meaning that people have to be very sharp. They have to be ready with, they have to be ready to make a move. If they see something that they like, then they need to really have done their homework, if they're using Help to Buy, have already made their Help to Buy
Would you
application.
advise that people apply for Help to Buy? I mean, you know, even before they're intending on listing their names for any launch or development?
So yeah, I would say so, because Help to Buy is it's obviously it'll be valid for you. So once you get your access code, then you're able to use that as you're searching through, and you can switch from, as long as you obviously haven't exchanged contracts, then you can change the property that you're buying. But it'll help you to be able to know, this is how much I have. Then if you then flip over into a new financial year, then obviously you can then update and get a new Help to Buy approval through that takes into account the tax that you paid for the year before. So it's a relatively simple process. The information's all there on Revenue Online, and it's a pretty easy and quick thing to go through.
And I think actually, I think it's quite easy as well. I mean, I only know for my own clients that you can actually speak to somebody in the Help to Buy office, and the guidance is great.
Yeah, and they're incredibly helpful. And I think the system has worked very well in terms of being able to help people. There obviously is, as part of the government's Housing for All plan, there's the introduction of the shared ownership scheme, which is due to be coming in summer. So that will be interesting as well, because obviously we kind of assume that everybody is being catered for in terms of the new homes that are being delivered into the market, but you may be in a lower price bracket than would allow you on a lot of the different on a lot of the different developments. So the shared ownership scheme essentially allows you to have either government or lender take an equity stake in the home, so you don't have to buy all of it. So you are buying somewhere between you'd be funding somewhere between 75 to 80% of the house between your deposit, whether that's Help to Buy or not, and mortgage. And then the balance of the equity is then purchased either by the state or the lender. And then you have a number of years to either buy that out, or if you choose to sell the property, then obviously that stake that you didn't own, then that gets repaid to the original funder of that amount of that stake as well.
And what sort of percentage of new homes are going to be eligible for that scheme, do you think?
So they haven't quite defined. Really. Yeah, exactly. They haven't quite defined all of the parameters of it yet, and I think it is going to be very much a work in progress, because I think where we would maybe be cautious of the scheme is Help to Buy has been amazing.
Yeah,
however, you cannot help the fact that it concentrates a huge volume of buyers within the parameters that qualify for Help to Buy. So it means that everybody who is trying to use Help to Buy is restricted in terms of the maximum purchase value. Therefore, they're all looking in the same sort of price bracket. Yeah. If you then add shared ownership into the equation, and there are more people looking within a similar sort of price bracket, and granted, shared ownership should be set at a lower amount, but it will still be an amount where people are also using the Help to Buy scheme. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with it in terms of where they actually define the parameters going forward on it. I think it will be perhaps kind of adjusted as we kind of go through the market. And obviously Help to Buy Help to Buy has a date at which it will need to be extended as well, which we would imagine will happen as well in order to be able to assist people with home purchases.
Well, that's very good to hear. It's great to hear. Knight Frank, together with Glenveagh, had or have a development in Balbriggan. Is it Castleland?
Castleland Park, which we launched. We actually launched Offplan just over the last few months.
Tell me this: when something comes to the market, bang, right, Offplan, what happens in Knight Frank? What happens? Tell me what happens. It's 9 o'clock in the morning and you go live. What happens then?
I like to think of us as a little bit like a swan. It looks very graceful above water, and there's a lot of work happening out of sight. It is. It's interesting and it's a challenge. We obviously we want to provide the absolute best service that we can, both to our client that we're selling for and also our clients that we're selling to. And the challenge with this really is the sheer volume of people. So, for example, with something like Castleland Park, the volume of inquiries that we received for that from people who are qualified buyers that would be interested in buying there actually ran into the thousands. So, and we had in that development 102 homes available. So from our perspective, it really is about
and it ran into the listing for potential purchasers ran into the thousands.
Yes. Yeah.
Why am I not surprised? I know I look surprised. Nobody can see me, but I look
It was in the
surprised, but I'm not
thousands.
surprised.
I know we're not alone, but
Yeah.
but I guess they're obviously, particularly with a developer like Glenveagh, they have a great reputation. People have a lot of confidence in buying off plan, and so they're comfortable enough to make that decision without necessarily walking the unit, and that becomes very interesting, obviously, because people do have the confidence to be able to buy. But from our perspective, obviously, we're trying to make the process as fair as possible.
Yeah.
Generally, with something like that, it'll operate on a first come, first served basis. So, assuming all things being equal and buyers being in a position where they're ready to go and they have their approvals, then we try and operate it on as fair a system as possible. Interestingly, on the very first release that we did at Castellan Park, of a team of 5 people doing calls pretty much all day, it took about a week just to return the phone calls.
Right. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be fancying that myself, Ray, at all. You get your team to get on with answering the phone calls. Listen, our time is up. I've been waved at here. I could have talked to you for the next 30 minutes, no problem whatsoever. We got to shop the breeze about all our trials and tribulations of purchasing property. And the new homes market ain't going away, that's for sure. And
Absolutely.
It's buoyant. And we wish it could be a little bit more abundant. And fingers crossed, though that will change. Ray Palmer-Smith, head of New Homes in Knight Frank and director at Knight Frank, thanks a million. I could have continued on for ages.
Thank you, Liz.
Pleasure. Thanks so much.
Live with local comforts. Love community over commuting. Live in a home built by Glenveagh. Love where you live. Glenveagh, home of the new.